Buonasera a tutti. Il Ministro Bonino e il Segretario di Stato Kerry hanno appena terminato il loro incontro e adesso rivolgeranno dichiarazioni alla stampa.
Grazie. Buongiorno. This is the first time John and I meet in person, but it's not the first time the Secretary of State is in Farnesina in his capacity. So you're mostly welcome, and it's really a pleasure to have you around today and next times. Ho espresso al Segretario di Stato Kerry il compiacimento mio e del Governo per il fatto che Roma può essere, e sta divenendo, lo è, un crocevia diplomatico per una nuova tornata importante di consultazioni che mira a riavviare il processo di pace e che si è rivelata proprio in queste ore molto intensa. La pace è innanzitutto nell'interesse dei due popoli, israeliano e palestinese, ed è fondamentale per l'intera regione medio orientale. Io sono rimasta e sono molto impressionata dal dinamismo dell'azione diplomatica dell'amministrazione americana e anche dall'eccezionale tenacia di John Kerry nei suoi sforzi per ampliare tutti i possibili spazi di intesa tra le parti. Ho avuto ieri occasione di incontrare anche i negoziatori israeliani e il ministro degli esteri giordano. Mi sono fatta l'idea che c'è una serietà e una determinazione delle parti. Mi paiono consapevoli, o comunque ho voluto sottolineare che è davvero l'ultima chance possibile, perché dei negoziati possono sul serio produrre risultati cui tutti speriamo. E mi auguro che l'incontro che John Kerry avrà tra 2 settimane con il ministro israeliano Netanyahu e col presidente Abbas possano essere assolutamente utili per la continuazione rapida di questo dossier. Non è un open-ended negotiation, credo ne siano tutti consapevoli. Per parte nostra faremo il possibile per sostenere questo sforzo. Abbiamo anche passato in rassegna qualche altro paese di scenario difficile, di fronte a tutti la questione Libia e la questione libica, in cui certamente la preoccupazione dell'evoluzione sul terreno condividiamo completamente, l'idea di vedere una situazione per evitare un peggioramento sul terreno. Ma certamente l'altra grande preoccupazione riguarda il terreno siriano. Noi ci auguriamo che gli incontri avuti da John Kerry a Mosca possano portare ad una ripresa e anche una realizzazione di quello che fu i risultati di Ginevra 1 e che possano anche in qualche modo risolvere il problema dello stallo che si vede ormai sul terreno, con delle conseguenze umanitarie, devo dire, inaccettabili e insopportabili, e anche con conseguenze politiche nei paesi vicini e nell'intera regione di fragilizzazione di interi paesi e credo anche di costi umani davvero ormai da crisi umanitaria. Abbiamo riconfermato il nostro impegno, faremo il possibile perché l'intera Europa sia dietro questo dossier e questi sforzi. Confermiamo quanto è stato il nostro impegno anche finanziario e anzi ci impegniamo a vedere se è possibile aumentare l'assistenza ai centinaia di migliaia, anzi milioni ormai di rifugiati sia in Giordania che in Libano. Ma mi auguro soprattutto che questo incontro possa determinare una rinnovata e ancora collaborazione tra i nostri due paesi, i cui legami non devo neanche ripetere né sottolineare. Ma ripeto, non è solo la tragedia siriana che ci preoccupa anche il possibile spillover in tutta la regione. John, grazie.
Thank you very much. Grazie. Thank you, Foreign Minister. Buongiorno a tutti Sono molto lieto di poter ritornare in Italia, specialmente per un incontro con il nuovo ministro degli affari esteri. Voglio dare da parte che degli Stati Uniti del Presidente Obama le nostre sentite congratulazioni. Obviously, on all of our minds this morning, this afternoon now, is the loss of life and the tragedy that took place yesterday in an accident at Genoa. And all of our sympathies are with the families and victims and with the Italian people. It is always a pleasure to be in Rome, and I appreciate the comments of the Foreign Minister with respect to a crossroads and a place where we can have the kind of diplomatic discussions that I've been able to have in the last 24 hours. And I'm especially pleased to meet with all of you at a time when Italy is looking to a new government to help to lead the country into the future, a time of change and transition. And over the past 2 years, as we all know, Italy has undertaken an unprecedented economic reform agenda. Needless to say, reform takes time, but we believe Italy is on the right path, and we encourage our cooperation in these endeavors. We believe that we can work this journey together and farther into the future, and perhaps more effectively with the transatlantic trade and investment partnership, which promises jobs and growth and opportunity for both of our countries, and particularly for young people. We know how many young people all across Europe are looking for that future, and we want to work with Italy and with other countries in an effort to move forward. We are excited to develop our partnership with Europe, and particularly with our good friend and ally, as the Minister referred to, with Italy. We look to the future with the knowledge that we are really linked in so many ways through our past endeavors. Italy has been right there, standing with us and supporting some 30,000 U.S. servicemen and men and women who live here in Italy, and your continued leadership in peacekeeping, your efforts with respect to Afghanistan and other places have been very important to helping to bring peace and opportunity to parts of the world. We're very grateful for the way that Italy has stepped up as the fourth largest supplier of troops and contributor to Afghanistan, the leader in the regional command west in Herat, and a very effective NATO partner and a huge force for progress in Libya. We talked about Libya this afternoon. There are still enormous challenges in Libya. Italy obviously has a special relationship, a special ability to help lead. And we look to work with Italy in the critical role of trying to bring stability to that troubled part of the world. In addition, Italy's voice has been particularly important with respect to the challenge of Syria. It was on my very first trip as secretary only 12 weeks ago that I came here to Rome, and I worked with your government in order to support the Syrian opposition that needs to emerge from the war in an inclusive, pluralistic, democratic government that is protective of minorities and of the rights of all Syrians. I appreciate Italy's material support for the opposition coalition, as well as its very, very generous response to the humanitarian crisis. So on this current trip, I'm back in Rome, focused again on not just the progress in Syria, but the possibilities of progress in the Middle East itself. We all know that the current path in Syria is simply unsustainable, and it will only lead, absent leadership that brings countries together to try to find a political solution, the current path will only lead to greater bloodshed, greater destruction, greater instability, a greater humanitarian crisis, a greater challenge to the stability of neighboring states, to the potential of extremists becoming stronger and the potential of chemical weapons falling into the hands of dangerous people. Those are all strategic interests that should motivate all of us to try to come to a negotiating table to find that political solution. 2 days ago, I was in Russia, meeting with President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov, and I'm grateful for their willingness to try to move to a new paradigm and to try to bring people together for a Geneva II. And I look forward to collaborating with them in the days ahead to try to bring the parties to that table. Tuesday, we announced that as soon as practical, and I talked today with the Secretary General of the United Nations, and I leave it to the United Nations to make its own announcements about the future, but we talked about the way ahead with respect to this negotiation and the effort to follow on last year's Geneva conference. Let me just make this clear. Geneva I, which was adopted by all the parties, including Russia, said that we must have a transition government arrived at by mutual consent, a transition government that has full executive authority. If you are going to arrive at something by mutual consent, by definition, the parties at issue must consent. And to consent, you must be willing to take part in some discussion. So it is our hope, both Russia and the United States, that we will have an ability to create a new dynamic to try to find this transitional government. And today I can announce on behalf of the United States another step forward to address the humanitarian crisis. An additional $100 million in humanitarian assistance to support those affected by the violence in Syria and the more than 1.4 million refugees already outside of Syria and the several million displaced within Syria. This funding will support the activities of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the United Nations Children's Fund, and the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, both within Syria as well as part of the regional refugee response in Jordan, Turkey, and Lebanon. In the end, my friends, the solution to this crisis is not more humanitarian assistance. In the end, it is a political solution that reduces the humanitarian crisis itself. And it is an effort to try to end the bloodshed. During my meeting with Foreign Minister Judah of Jordan this morning here in Rome, I heard the latest from him about the nearly 2,000 refugees pouring across Jordan's borders every single night, not to mention the staggering numbers in Lebanon, Egypt, and Turkey. And what the United States wants, what Jordan wants, what Italy wants, is an end to the slaughter. Foreign Minister Judah and I also had a follow-up conversation to the announcement last week by the representatives of the Arab League that they would affirm their support for the Arab Peace Initiative. Now, I spoke with Abu Mazen this morning, President Abbas, and yesterday at the Villa Taverna I had a productive meeting again with Justice Minister Livni. I plan to continue this discussion in the weeks to come, and I will be traveling back to Israel and the West Bank in 2 weeks in order to meet with both Prime Minister Netanyahu as well as President Abbas. So I thank Foreign Minister Bonino for her warm welcome here today. I congratulate her on her new duties and the new government as it takes on its responsibilities. I promise you that President Obama and the United States of America stand ready to work with this government in all aspects, economic, security, and in ways that strengthen the relationship between Italy and the United States. We very much look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Abbiamo tempo per 2 domande. Cominciamo con Margherita Dinassi del TG1. Grazie.
Sì, buonasera.
Buonasera.
Indubbiamente in questi ultimi giorni, in questa settimana c'è stata una fortissima accelerazione dell'attività diplomatica per arrivare a una soluzione del conflitto israelo-palestinese e anche per la crisi siriana. Ecco, la domanda è, sembra che la parola chiave sia fare presto. Perché fare presto? E poi quali sono le priorità dal punto di vista degli Stati Uniti? Quali sono le priorità dal punto di vista dell'Italia, che per quanto riguarda lei, Ministro, credo che siano anche quelle dell'Europa, visto che il suo sogno è quello dell'Europa federata. Grazie.
Io credo che John potrà elaborare più di me, ma fare presto lo necessita innanzitutto la situazione, le tragedie umane che abbiamo descritto, soprattutto anzi è già durata troppo a lungo, tutti lo pensiamo. Fare presto anche per evitare uno spillover nei paesi vicini, che è una destabilizzazione politica, è un allargamento del conflitto che sarebbe poi molto difficile portare evidentemente sotto controllo. Quindi il fare presto in realtà è una necessità che è imposta e in realtà oggi mi sembra che altrimenti il deterioramento della situazione può avere veramente conseguenze notevoli. Per noi la priorità è innanzitutto evidentemente sostenere questo sforzo diplomatico, ci auguriamo che l'intera Europa voglia sostenere questo sforzo diplomatico, essendo inteso che esistono poi altri teatri in cui siamo già impegnati, penso al Libano, menzionavamo la Libia per esempio, o l'Afghanistan, ma io credo che in questa fase sia l'Europa che deve in qualche modo farsi carico di sostenere. Noi siamo anche in una posizione, lo dico personalmente, ma di riuscire ad avere anche dei rapporti, per esempio, con il mondo arabo che possono aiutare in questa fase in cui abbiamo bisogno di ponti di dialogo a tutti i livelli. Quindi ritengo che coincidono in gran parte le priorità, aumentano per quanto riguarda anche altri scenari di più diretta competenza, e una parola sola voglio aggiungere rispetto alla presentazione del segretario Kerry. Anche noi, Italia, Europa in generale, ma Italia in particolare, attribuiamo una grandissima importanza all'apertura del negoziato transatlantico di libero scambio. Siamo convinti e consapevoli di avere qualche problema evidentemente, ma riteniamo che sia questo uno dei volani della crescita di cui sempre molto si parla. Grazie.
Thank you, Minister. Why quickly? Why move quickly? The answer is very simple, because for 30 years or more, there has been a pent-up demand to try to resolve the issues of the Middle East. And it is clear that when left to a vacuum, or when left to delay, bad things happen. Things happen that work against the possibilities of peace. It is my belief, and I think shared by many people, most importantly President Obama's belief, because he is the one who went to Israel and opened up this window of possibility in the speech that he gave and stressed the importance of it, because people who are denied peace can ultimately find other means of trying to satisfy their aspirations. I think that the security interests of the region, the economic interests of the region, the political interests of the region, the demographic interests of the region, the counterterrorism interests of the region, and other interests all compel the notion that we need to be serious about this. We have seen presidents and prime ministers and secretaries of states and foreign ministers struggle with this for a long time. From White Plantation, Annapolis, Taba, Oslo, Madrid, Olmert, there have been many, many efforts. The truth is, most people understand what the contours of the two-state solution are. Most people understand what it will take to satisfy the parties in this case. They are legitimate interests. Israel needs guarantees for security. The Palestinians need guarantees for a state that they can be proud of, that is a contiguous state. And I think the urgency is that the longer you do not move towards peace, the more you have the possibility of conflict and even war. So President Obama has made it clear to all the parties. He wants to know if people are serious. And I think there are ways to prove whether or not people are serious. That's what I'm seeking on his behalf over the course of these next days. And my hope is that that parties will come together in a serious way. I believe, I will say this to you now, I believe that the parties are serious. I believe that a process is going on right now to examine these possibilities legitimately with the Palestinians and with the Israelis. And we intend to keep this quiet and private as much as one can so that people can make tough judgments in their own appropriate space. And that's what we're doing. But that's why it's urgent, because this has gone on for a long time, and the impatience level is building up in many places with all of the respective dangers that are attached to that.
Abbiamo tempo per un'ultima domanda. Brad Clapper della Associated Press.
Hi, excuse me for not standing. I weighted down by electronics. Yesterday, serious allegations were made about the State Department's handling of the Benghazi attack and its aftermath, including senior officials who say they've been pressured or even demoted for not towing the line. Do you still think that...
I couldn't hear that. Including what?
Including officials, senior officials who say they've been pressured or demoted for not towing the line. Do you still think the department has handled things well? And will you investigate these new allegations, or do you dismiss them as rehash? And on Syria, very simply, what is more important, the U.S. aid to Syrians, including the $100 million in humanitarian assistance you announced today, or the continued military support for the Assad regime by Russia, which we learned today could now include state-of-the-art surface-to-air missiles? Whose contribution is really having a bigger effect on Syria's civil war? Thank you.
Well, Jim, look, it's not that simple with respect to Syria. So I'm not going to make comparisons between one country and the United States' humanitarian aid, because, as you know, other countries are providing lethal assistance, and the opposition is obviously capable of fighting on the ground and has been. That's not where this discussion needs to go now. It needs to go where Foreign Minister Lavrov and I tried to move it to in Moscow, which is to the importance of the negotiations where all of these things will be appropriately measured at the table. I'm not going to try to pre-cook it. That would be an enormous mistake. What we need to do is get to that negotiating table. All of these kinds of asymmetrical and counter-arguments will be made by all the parties, and hopefully we will negotiate our way through that thicket in a reasonable way with a view to doing what Sergei Lavrov and I agreed to in Moscow. I thought what Prime Minister Lavrov said and did in Moscow was very important. He stood up and said that Russia is not tied to any one person. He said that he believes we need to implement Geneva I, and that requires a transition government by mutual consent. There is no way that anybody here believes that the opposition is ever going to give consent to President Assad to be running that government. So the fact that Russia and Foreign Minister Lavrov embraced this path, I think, is very, very significant. With respect to, you asked a second. With respect to Benghazi, I have been literally in 24-hour meetings, flying from Moscow. I've seen the most cursory headlines of the testimony that took place yesterday. So I'm really not in a position to start making judgments about it, and I'm certainly not going to make those judgments in Rome, Italy, rather than in Washington, D.C. But I will tell you this. The State Department will leave no stone unturned. I've already made it crystal clear to the chairman of the relevant committees that I have assigned my chief of staff, David Wade, to be responsible for liaisoning with them to answer any questions that they have. And I am absolutely determined that this issue will be answered, will be put to bed, and if there's any culpability in any area that is appropriate to be handled in some way with some discipline, it will be appropriately handled. But that judgment awaits me in a report that will be forthcoming, and I'm confident that any recent evidence will be a component of that consideration. So let's wait till we get back to the United States and I've had a chance to catch up to the full measure of what took place.
Do you have nothing to say about the reports of Russian surface to air missiles? Pretty state-of-the-art going to Syria?
I had my say with President Putin and I had my say with Sergei Lavrov, and we made an agreement to go to a negotiation in the next days. And I'm not going to get into here now at this moment, as I said, distinguishing features between one country's aid and another country's aid and who's doing what. That would be counterproductive to what we're trying to accomplish. I think we've made it crystal clear we would prefer that Russia was not supplying assistance. That is on record. That hasn't changed. But I'm not going to get into the qualitative differences at this moment.
Bene, grazie.
Maybe I'd like to add a comment. What has been happening in the Syria and the region dossier up to now, it's quite clear. And who was standing and who was supporting whom. But if we want to support the efforts of negotiation, I don't think we have to look so much backward, we have to look forward. And that means that, as Secretary of State Kerry said, the question is now to see how we move from Geneva 1 to implementing Geneva 1. And I think it's not useful for the moment to restate who is doing what. We are providing humanitarian support, but let me be clear. The only possible solution is a political one. I don't believe that there is a military solution at hand. The humanitarian assistance is not a solution, it's just an help. And I'm proud that we can contribute to help also. Meeting the foreign minister of Jordan, you can really sense the difficulties that the country is facing. So if we can help, we are proud to do it. But again, never humanitarian assistance has been the solution. The only one is really to push forward a possible negotiation.
Can I just add, so that you can go back to the record on this, because I want you to have it. We have previously stated that the missiles, particularly the Yakan A300, is potentially destabilizing with respect to the state of Israel. And so we've made it very clear historically that that is a concern of the United States. But again, I think drawing the which is more important relative balance, which is clearly going to be part of the negotiation in Geneva at this point, doesn't take us where we need to go, notwithstanding that we believe, as I said, that it is destabilizing.
Thank you.
Grazie.